Welcome, everyone, to this week's Open to Suggestions. As we told you in last week, we have been very excited about today's show. I hope that everyone remembers our little teasers that went out about this wonderful guest that we have joining us today. Are you there?
Yes,
Oh, hi.
I'm here.
Oh, I'm so glad. So, Lawrence Spencer, you have been, not only are you an author, but you are a public speaker. You have all over the world, if I'm understanding right, talking about the alien interview, the book that you wrote that has inspired, I think, a lot of controversy and maybe also a lot of awakening. Is that
Yeah, I haven't been all over the world talking, but I've certainly done quite a few radio show interviews concerning the book and a couple of public appearances. There's quite an extensive website related to the book. Um, so the book has been around for now 7 years, I believe. It was published originally uh, as a printed paperback book as well as a free PDF book, um, and has since been translated by volunteers into 10 different languages. Um, so it's kind of taken on a life of its own in many ways, and there's no telling how many millions of people have read the book since it became available for free on the internet. Um, but needless to say, there's been quite a considerable amount of interest in the information revealed in the book. So that's what I'll try to describe to you today and answer your questions as best I can.
That's so great. I'm so excited that you're here with us, Lawrence. I know that again, like you've done a lot of different things, and I'm sure that you've been asked these questions a million times. So I really do appreciate you joining us today and talking about this. One of the things that I'd like to start with, because a lot of people, we did a lot of teasers last week and we didn't really put it out there, but this book, Alien Interview, and please, if I get anything incorrect, please correct me so that we're getting it out there right. But the alien interview, if I'm understanding it correctly, is basically a direct writing, a direct transcript with footnotes. Don't get me wrong, but of an interview that's done through basically a government agency. And so, not only is it a great writing, but it's, if people take this in as what I believe to be very profound, it could change almost every idea on the planet. And so I'd like you just to kind of, for the audience and maybe people who aren't familiar with the Roswell interviews that were done in 1947 in the United States, I'd like you to kind of give some explanation about your book and about that type of, about what that's all meaning.
Okay, great. Well, if people who are listening to the show don't know already, in 1947 there was a UFO crash in Roswell, near Roswell, New Mexico, near the Air Force base called the 509th Bomb Group. And this was 1 year after the end of World War II. And the 509th Bomb Group was the Air Force base that was the home base for the airplanes that dropped the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. The only time in the history, the recorded history of Earth, that nuclear weapons have been dropped on civilian populations, as far as we know. And that was the conclusion of World War II. So this Air Force base, which still operated a year later and housed the aircraft and personnel of that Air Force division, also had several nurses, perhaps as many as 5 nurses and some other medical personnel stationed at that base. And that base is also located only about 100 miles from Alamogordo, Mexico, where the testing of the first atomic bombs occurred in the year prior to the end of World War II. So the a lot of nuclear testing had occurred in that area for many years prior to the actual use of the nuclear bombs at the end of World War II. So there was a good deal of very, very bizarre, disruptive activity in the area because of all the nuclear testing, and subsequently thousands of nuclear tests have been done in Nevada and the area surrounding this base, as well as many other places around the world. But in 1947, a UFO crashed in early part of July near the base on the ranch of a farmer named Matt Brazel. The local sheriff was notified of the crash by the rancher. He went to the site of the crash and notified the military authorities, who from the base were dispatched to go out and investigate what had occurred and so forth. Some of the personnel at the base were dispatched to go there, and included in those was one Army flight surgeon nurse named Matilda McElroy. She was 23 years old at that time. She accompanied the security officer from the base, a fellow named Major Cavett, to not only drive the vehicle that the security officer was in, but to render medical assistance to anyone at the site if it were necessary. So when she arrived at the site, they discovered the dead bodies of 3 aliens aboard the craft, as well as the pilot of the craft that was still alive. The nurse was able to communicate, receive mental impressions, as she describes it, from the alien pilot of the craft, but she was the only one that was able to perceive any kind of communication from this pilot. So because of this, it was decided that she would accompany the pilot of the craft back to the base and be its constant companion during the subsequent investigation. The day after the crash, the entire incident was covered up very, very thoroughly by the military, even though it hadn't been announced on the radio and front headline news of the newspapers. That this crash had occurred. The following day, the military covered it up and denied that the whole thing happened, saying that it was just a weather balloon and the whole thing was a big mistake and blah, 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 blah. But what actually occurred, according to the nurse and the information that she sent to me, was that the alien pilot was taken back to the base and subjected to a series of interviews, which she conducted on behalf of the U.S. Army, Air Force, and American intelligence agencies, as she was the only person able to communicate with the pilot. The pilot of the craft.
Lawrence, I just want to ask, and because I think. When you say communicate, right, the reason that people couldn't communicate with this pilot is because she was doing it through telepathy, right?
Yeah, I was just about to explain that.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, the pilot of the craft didn't occupy a biological body. It occupied a body that was made out of synthetic materials, and therefore had no ears or nose or mouth, as it doesn't need to eat or breathe. So all of the communication that was transacted between the alien and the nurse was done by direct mental communication, by telepathy. So because of this phenomenon, and because no one else was able to communicate with the pilot, and the pilot apparently was not willing to communicate with anyone else, in spite of numerous attempts on the part of the military and other people to gain the pilot's cooperation to communicate in writing or by sign language or by telepathy with other individuals who were sent in an attempt to try to establish telepathic communication. The pilot refused to communicate with anyone else. So So the interviews occurred between the nurse and the alien under the supervision of military intelligence and civilian intelligence and so forth over a period of about 6 weeks. All the questions were posed by various government agents and so forth and given to the nurse, who in turn asked the questions of the pilot, and the pilot responded to her, and her responses were given then to a stenographer and then to a typist who typed the responses up on a manual typewriter in the form of transcriptions. And these were all passed out. Copies of these were passed out to many personnel who were by this time had arrived at the base to witness and participate in this very, very phenomenal situation. So to cut to the chase, 60 years later, after all of this occurred, the nurse, who had spent her entire life in a witness protection program, essentially in hiding, under the control of the government, to make sure that she never told anyone what she saw or what she did or what occurred there, along with all of the other personnel who were at the base or lived in the town or had any first or second-hand knowledge of the events of that day, were essentially kept quiet, either under pain of death or threat of pain of death, or by whatever means, to make sure that no one never disclosed that these interviews had occurred or anything of this kind had ever happened. So, having kept this information secret her whole life, she began at the end of her life to feel as though she needed to do something to reveal this information. So as it turns out, she had been able to keep a copy of the complete typed interview transcripts, which represented about 100 pages or so of typed material on military, typed by the military. It's a top secret document. But she was able to keep a copy of this. So coincidentally, in 1996, 1997, I was writing or doing research along with the editor of the book that I was writing, called The Oz Factors. I was doing research into a variety of different things, and the lady who was the editor of my first book used to be, at that time, she was a big fan of the Art Bell radio show, which at that time was the predecessor to what later became Coast to Coast Radio, which bought Art Bell out. But at that time, Art Bell was had a big cult following, more or less. His radio broadcasts occurred during the middle of the night, so people who were interested in UFOs and psychic phenomena and all kinds of things of that nature stayed up late at night and listened to Art interview people about a wide variety of topics. So she would stay up late at night and listen to all this sort of thing. So one day, she just sort of parenthetically gave me a piece of paper with the phone number on it. She says, You should call this phone number because this woman, I've heard that this woman might know something about UFOs." And I wasn't really researching UFOs. I'm not interested in UFOs. I've never have been. But she gave me this note, and that's all she knew about it. She doesn't remember, or she didn't remember at that time. She's since passed away from breast cancer. But she didn't know where she got the number from exactly. She thought it was something related to the Art Bell radio show. Anyway, I just kind of on a lark, I called the phone number, and this lady answered the phone. This was in 1997. And I said, I was given this phone number, and I was told you might know something about UFOs. And the lady said, "No, I don't have any information I can share with you." Or actually, I was told she might know something about Roswell. She said, "No, I don't have any information I can share with you." So Um, I described the book I was writing and the research I was doing, and she was very interested in it. So she said, "Well, when you're done with the book and you're published, send me a copy of it." So she gave me her mailing address, so forth. So a year or so later, I sent her a copy of the book, and I never gave it another thought. So 10 years later, this is now 2007, I received a big envelope in the mail from this same woman that I spoke to on the phone, and it turns out that her name, or the name she was using as a false name given to her by the government, probably one of many false names over a period of 60 years that she used as part of her witness protection identifications. The name that I knew that she gave me, and that the envelope was addressed from, was Matilda O'Donnell McElroy, and the envelope came from Ireland. And inside the envelope was a copy of this top secret military transcripts, typewritten, along with a lot of other handwritten notes on various kinds of paper, and typed notes typed by her. They were kind of interspersed in between the pages of the interview transcripts, as well as 2 letters that she wrote to me explaining what all of this was about and why she sent it to me and all of this sort of thing. So needless to say, all of this was extraordinarily bizarre, to say the least. And when you read the transcripts and the letters and so forth, it really is incredible. It's unbelievable. It certainly was incredible and unbelievable to me, but some aspects of it seemed familiar and had to do to some degree with the research I had done for the book that I wrote 10 years earlier, and so forth. So I sat down and I read the stuff kind of with a grain of salt, because it all seemed rather unbelievable. And she says, even in her letter to me, that this is going to seem really unbelievable to people, and they're not going to be able to give this much credibility until you start reading all of the details and start researching and investigating the details. So I spent about 6 months trying to verify whether or not everything that is said in her letters and in these interview transcripts is actually factual. Is it accurate? So after 6 months of full-time research, to the limit of my ability to investigate over the internet and so forth, I came to the conclusion that every single thing, as far as that could be verified, that I could verify at least, was factual, and there was evidence that it actually occurred exactly as it was described in the interviews and in her letters. So what I did was I decided, she asked me in her letter if I would publish the book, because she was going to pass away and she wasn't able to publish it because of her military status, and essentially she was under threat of death if she was said anything about it. So she asked me if I would publish it. So after 6 months of investigation, I decided, well, okay, I will publish it, but I'm going to put the notes of all of my own research together with the book in the form of footnotes, so that anyone who wants to read this information can read the footnotes and verify for themselves and do their own research to discover whether or not this material is as factual as it seems to be. So this was 7 or 8 years ago, since the book was finally published as a printed book and made available on the internet as a free PDF. Subsequently, I've been contacted by many, many, many people around the world who are lifelong UFO researchers and authorities on the subject of Roswell. One man in particular who has recently passed away, named Ron Gardner, who's probably one of the world's leading authorities on Roswell. He owned the Roswell UFO Enigma Museum in Roswell for 15 years, published tremendous amount of material on the subject of Roswell and Area 51. Interviewed personally 100 first and second-hand witnesses to the events of Roswell. So had a minute and detailed first-hand knowledge, first or second-hand knowledge of the events that occurred, names, places, dates, people, all of this sort of thing. And he was able to verify to me that, in fact, this information is true. It's correct. And many other people have verified to me, some or verified to others who in turn told me that, former CIA agents and so forth have verified that, yes, indeed, these events did occur. So that's for every individual to decide whether or not the events occurred, the Roswell events occurred there's volumes and volumes and volumes of information available on the internet about Roswell, much of which is conflicting and all subject to the ongoing military and intelligence community cover-up of the incident, which has continued ever since 1947. The government has always continued to deny that this ever occurred, that anything like this has ever occurred, and in fact, the government's official policy is that UFOs don't exist, and so on and so forth. Well, coincidentally, the beginning of all of the UFO cover-ups and so forth by not only the U.S. government but global governments began in 1947 with the Roswell incident. President Truman was the president of the United States at that time. He appointed General Vandenberg, who at that time was the head of the U.S. Army Air Force, to be in charge of ensuring that anything having to do with UFOs was covered up and kept secret and maintained in a state of closed lips. You can't talk about it, you can't say anything about it, and any evidence to the contrary had to be denied or covered up. So Vandenberg made it his mission to make sure that this occurred, and subsequently the Majestic 12 committee was formed, which is allegedly a committee of people in charge of making sure that all UFO incidents are covered up either by denial or by misinformation, disinformation, counterintelligence, by whatever means, for which the government has and other agencies have virtually unlimited funds and ability to do. So that cover-up process has continued since 1947 and continues to this day. You can read endlessly on the internet about UFOs, Roswell, and various things, and for every line of material you read that says that it's true and the UFOs actually exist, there are just as many or more lines of information that lead you in the direction of believing that the whole thing is just it's just crazy. The amount of information, disinformation, counterspin, counterintelligence, false information, Hollywood movies, wild tales of aliens and invasions, and it just goes on and on, and it's built up to the point where there is now so much information and disinformation and counterinformation available around the world, most of which has been placed there on purpose by various agencies to make the whole subject indecipherable and overwhelming to any investigator. That it's easy to either become a cult follower of the whole UFO phenomena or to just dismiss the entire thing as a waste of time. So people do that, of course, anywhere from one extreme to the other. But for my part, the only thing I've done here is take this information I received from this nurse, I edited it into a printable book according to the policies of the publisher for formatting and so forth. I took all of the notes and letters and information that she sent to me, and I put it in an order which appeared to me to be correct in the context of the interviews, and included the letters and everything that I received from her exactly verbatim, word for word, letter for letter, as I received it from her, and then included my footnotes, as I mentioned, as an addendum to the book at the end. The various editions of the book are now available that have the footnotes interspersed throughout the text so that you can follow the footnotes while you're reading the material if you want to study it that carefully. The book is now available in 10 different languages. It's been recorded as an audiobook. It's available in every electronic media format. So the material is quite accessible to anyone who's interested in it. But for my part, I've been very, very careful to just try to do what the nurse asked me to do, which is just make the information available. I didn't write this book. I didn't write any of the material. I didn't even write the footnotes. So I'm not the author. I'm only the editor. I'm just passing this information along. I don't know how much of it I believe or disbelieve, and my personal opinions or points of view concerning it, I think, are as significant as one of 8 billion other points of view or personal opinions that exist on this planet. And I don't think that I know anything more about it than anyone else does, and I don't pretend to. I'm not. It's not my purpose to champion this material or do anything with it except do what the nurse asked me to do, which was to make it available. So I've done that. The only reason I've been able to do that really is because I'm retired from my working profession, and I have spare time along with writing other books that I've written myself and published, and I write a blog and different things to amuse myself. But I don't make any money from any of this, and it's kind of a hobby. But as I mentioned earlier, the material in the book has become very, very interesting to lots and lots of people around the world. Lots of people have taken it upon themselves to republish the material or record it as an audiobook or to translate it into various languages. So I have helped ensure that the translations that have been done are accurate, and there are now 10 official translations that have been published with my authorization. So my only concern is that the information as published originally is not altered or added to or changed in any way, so that people can read the same thing that I received from the nurse verbatim. I think that's a viable responsibility for me. That's about all I can do with it, really. Anyway, so that's how this whole thing got started, and we are where we are now with it.
Lawrence, how many books are sold exactly? Do you know? We had a question in chat about that.
How many books have been sold? I have no idea.
Oh, okay. I thought that somebody mentioned 1 million books.
There's no way of the number of books sold is not the same thing as the number of people who have read the book. I mean, the book exists in 10 different translations and electronic versions, PDFs, audiobooks. Altogether, as far as the retail, the number of books sold retail directly from the various publishers, I'm guessing maybe, I don't know, 7,000 or 8,000 copies, 10,000 copies. Not many, not a lot of copies of the book. But because the books are books, and one person buys a book and they read it and they give it to a secondhand bookstore and they resell it, or they give the book to their friend, or they pass it around, amongst each other. They download a free copy of the PDF from the internet and read it, and then email it to each other and so forth. Judging by the number of when you do a search on the internet for the Alien Interview book, there are millions of pages of content. So I'm guessing that certainly hundreds of thousands of people have read the book or parts of the book, if not millions, but I don't know of any way to accurately assess how many people have actually read the book. I would say that no more than 10,000 copies of the book have been sold, in various forms and languages and so forth. So it's not what the New York Times would call a bestseller.
It should be. I think it should be.
I think it should be too. But here's the thing: is that with the book, there's a lot of people, or a lot of times when you try and tell people about this, they'll say, oh well, I've already I've heard of this or whatever it is, but they've had a small piece. And to me, this was giving much more explanation, and it was much more detailed than anything else I had ever experienced. My question is, though, you did a lot of research into the validity of the statements that this nurse gave you, and basically, kind of making sure that, that she was a real person, and that the things that she was saying weren't just some kind of crazy whatever. How much into the material of the book, and I'm talking about what this alien by the name of Errol, if I'm saying that right, actually says to the nurse, and lays out in this transcript as certain descriptions of a whole series of different things as the interviews go on. Were you able to put validity into any of that, or is it so, again, like this nurse has said, is it so out there that it's hard to put together? I mean, or was that even a focus for you?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I spent a long time researching anything that I could substantiate through research. I mean, primarily over the internet. At the time I created the footnotes and published the book was 1997. At that time, the internet was relatively new thing compared to what it's become since then. So the number of resources and websites and information available to a researcher at that time was considerably less than it is now. But at that time, in 1996 or 1997, when I was compiling the footnotes, I took every keyword or phrase or subject matter that I could isolate and identify in the book and her letters and the transcripts and so forth, and looked it up on the internet or in a book or wherever I could find information about it, to see whether or not what detailed information might exist about that subject matter. So that's what I published in the book and have subsequently published on the website for the book, because over the years, lots and lots and lots of new information and new research has surfaced regarding the material in the book. So the book by itself doesn't include, by any stretch of the imagination, all of the substantiation or research or substantiating information or corroboration of the information in the book by a long way. But between, the thing for people to do is to read the book and to read the transcripts and to do your own research and find out for yourself. The last thing I would do, regardless of whether I wrote the book or whether somebody else wrote the book, is to tell people that you need to think for yourself. You need to investigate and read and study and think your own thought about this. Because for me or anyone else to sit down and tell you what to think or what to believe or what not to believe, or for you to go on some chat room or some idiot website someplace with a bunch of people who with anonymous avatars are just jabbering to each other about whatever they think, whatever the latest superstition is or government disinformation operation happens to be. To me, that's a colossal waste of time and just part of the dumbing down process of the citizens of the world via the internet. What I think is the only important thing is, not only for this book but anything else, is to do your own research, do your own study, think your own thought, and discover for yourself what's true for you or not true for you, because there's only, in my personal point of view, there's only one opinion in the world that has any value, and that's your opinion. My opinion isn't any more valuable than yours is. So, if you want to form an opinion about this material, you need to study it or not and form your own opinion. If you're not interested, great. I mean, who cares?
Right.
It's up to you,
Well, and so I had some curiosity about this as well, which of course I'm going to continue on with questioning. But when you wrote this book, I'm just kind of curious. Did people ever come out to you and say that they did, like when you talk about like the blogs and getting more information, was it just the internet that kind of appeared to, or when people started seeing this book, did it bring out other people kind of thing? You know what I mean? That were willing to talk about things. I mean, is there any mention of that? I'm just curious.
Yeah. Well, there isn't anything about that in the book. I mean, the book was published in 1997, and it hasn't been changed since then. It's
Good, yeah.
same exact. Nothing has been added to it or taken away from it. But since the book was published, and again, I didn't write the book. I just edited it and published. The nurse didn't actually write the book either per se. She wrote the footnotes or rather her comments. The letters that are included in the book, but the book is 90% of the book is the copies of these military transcripts of the interview that occurred between the military through the nurse with the alien pilot of the CFO. That's really what the book is. It's just a copy of these transcripts, and that's where the real meat of the content of the book is in these interview transcripts. It's what the pilot told the nurse and what the pilot revealed to us as human beings on this planet through these interviews with the nurse. Some of that can be substantiated easily. I mean, depending on what it was, the subject matter that the pilot was describing. Some of it is not possible to substantiate. It's entirely subjective. It's an opinion of the part of the pilot. Other parts of it, the pilot describes prehistorical information about the history of Earth and activities that have been going on in this solar system and in this galaxy and this universe for trillions and trillions of years. I mean, how do you substantiate that? You can't.
Right.
But
well, when you
that's why it's so important that people have to study it and read it for themselves and really, you have to do research.
Can you kind of tell people, because when you start talking about, first of all, because two of the things that you said were, basically this is the transcript of the crashed site, the alien that was, because there were 4 aliens on the ship, 3 were already dead, 1 was alive. This alien was interviewed by a nurse that was basically chosen, if I'm understanding right, by the alien, right? Because it was like, that's who got to see whatever when telepathically, the images, the words, all of that, it was like, it must have been somehow directed to her, which is actually described in the transcripts, I think, towards the end. But and then you talk about, so like not being able to really verify some of this stuff because it's so, you're talking about thousands of years and all of the different things that this being is describing as probably a reason for suppression, because it would go against a lot of the beliefs on the planet right now. And so I'm wondering if you can give a little bit of description into that, and not necessarily belief, more of what the transcript said on those terms as far as what is it that her responsibility on this planet was and what the mission was. Is that possible to do that?
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah, the pilot of the craft describes in great detail why it was that the spacecraft was on Earth or in the area, and the activities of the civilization that she's from, to which the nurse refers as calls it the domain. although the nurse says it could be her impression of the idea that she got from the pilot was what she called the domain, the name of the civilization from which the pilot came. But she says it could easily be called any number of things. It could be called the realm, the territory, the property. It's a kind of a generic, broad concept. The civilization, as far as she could understand in the English language, didn't have a name that you could translate into English, nor could you really translate much of anything. The civilization from which the pilot of the craft was from in the English language. So all of the communication that occurred between the nurse and the pilot obviously had to be interpreted through the nurse and the nurse's ability to understand the notions and images and impressions and emotions and so forth of the pilot, and then convert that into English language. And then have it written down by and typed by transcribers, military transcribers, and then given to military personnel and intelligence personnel for their interpretation and so forth. But essentially what the pilot of the craft says is the reason that the craft was in the area to begin with were several. Initially, on the surface of it, the craft was in the area investigating nuclear testing in the area, not just near the Roswell base, but in general on the planet, because the advent of nuclear bombs on a planet obviously would be a little bit of an alarm, a red flag to anybody in nearby space. It would be fairly obvious that something really bizarre was happening, particularly people from a civilization who are trillions of years old, who have technology and capabilities that are so far beyond our comprehension as to be, indecipherable. So the pilot describes during the course of the interviews in detail the civilization that she's from, that the nurse calls the domain, and that they have been operating in the solar system and in this galaxy for a very, very long time, but they've only recently come into the solar system and to Earth about 10,000 years ago. She gives the exact date. Says they landed a battalion of 3,000 members of their invasion force in the Himalaya mountains and created a base in the center of the mountain, protected by a force screen. And they set it up as a base, as part of their ongoing invasion of the physical universe. This civilization from which the pilot and her personnel came are part of a much, much larger invasion force that's has already invaded the political center of the Milky Way galaxy and conquered it and essentially taken possession of at least the political infrastructure of the Milky Way galaxy and a lot of other surrounding territory. And their principal purpose is to the conquest of the entire physical universe and the acquisition and disposition of the resources of the physical universe for whatever their purposes might be. Her inference is that they're from some other universe. They're not even from this universe, although she doesn't get into the details of that specifically. But as regards Earth, she said they set up the space about 10,000 years ago in the Himalayas as part of their ongoing invasion activity, and we're not aware that some remaining residual forces of the civilization that they conquered in this area, who controlled the galaxy up to that time, which she refers to as the Old Empire. She says that's not the actual name of the government of this galaxy, but the domain forces refer to it as the Old Empire, as they have taken over from by conquest. There were remnants of a space fleet in this solar system from the Old Empire that attacked this base in the Himalayas and destroyed the base and captured the beings who were in this installation as spiritual beings. Obviously, they killed their bodies and destroyed the base and so forth.
And then took this. Now, do you refer to exactly what kind of other being this? I'm sorry if you might have even said it, but when you're talking about this invasion, right? This old empire, did she say what type of alien life they were, or no? Like what type of being, or you know what I mean? Like people
well,
are.
She does describe the galactic civilization as being a kind of a tyrannical hierarchy governmentally composed of civilizations of huge variety of planets, like you would expect, for there to be life forms of every imaginable kind throughout the billions and billions of stars and planets and so forth in the galaxy the size of the Milky Way. But apparently the population of Earth is somewhat representative of the citizens of the galaxy as a whole, at least those that inhabit the kind of biological bodies that can be sustained by this planet, this kind of planet, where you breathe oxygen and you have a body that's made out of water principally, and so it's the beings that are on this planet inhabit bodies which are not representative necessarily of the kind of bodies that one might find throughout the rest of the galaxy. It depends on the type of planet and atmosphere and air pressure and chemistry and so forth of the planetary environment that you came from. But at least on this planet, the beings here on this planet are spiritually representative of of a certain kind of population throughout this galaxy and adjoining galaxies. Long story short, essentially, what the forces of the pilot discovered after some couple of thousands of years of investigation and warfare between their invading fleet and the remaining parts of the space fleet from the Old Empire in this area, they discovered that planet Earth has been being used as a prison for by the Old Empire forces for some unknown period of time, thousands of years, millions of years, no one knows for sure, but certainly for a very long time. And that the beings who inhabit bodies on this planet were transplanted here as prisoners of various types, either political prisoners or just undesirable people, or beings from various places for various reasons. She gives a detailed description of the kinds of beings that are on this planet that were deemed unsuitable to the civilization of the Old Empire. The nurse or the pilot refers to them as untouchables. The government of the Old Empire, or a faction of the government that set up and operates the prison planet, describes these untouchables as being either psychopaths of one kind or another that are just beyond any kind of redemption or therapy. I mean, they can't be their help. They're just permanently psychopathically crazy murderers, thieves, lunatics, politicians, the typical kind of population you see on this planet, mixed together with a large number of the rest of the population that are just unneeded and unwanted extra population from the society. People who don't want to work, people who are revolutionaries, people who are counterculture, people who don't want to pay taxes and be an obedient slave, servant of the government, beings who are just who are highly intelligent. They're geniuses, they're inventors, they're artists, they're creative people who are just not going to be subjugated into the role of an obedient slave-like citizen of a totalitarian government kind of civilization. So all of these unwanted people, for whatever reasons, as spiritual beings, are taken away and dumped on this planet, and by various means have their memories erased of who they are, where they came from, and made to inhabit biological bodies as made available to them on this planet from various civilizations and various planetary cultures around the galaxy and adjoining galaxy. Together with their languages and cultures and social superstitions and so on and so forth, and all as part of a prison planet system, which the pilot refers to as a false facade civilization. So apparently, according to the pilot, when the prison system was set up, most substantially around 10, 15, 20,000 years ago, when huge influxes of population were brought to populate the prison planet, a false facade society was set up, and a false facade of infrastructure was set up on this planet for two purposes. One, to create the illusion that earlier civilizations have inhabited Earth and evolved culture and civilization and architecture and infrastructure on this planet over many, many, many thousands of years as a part of an alleged natural evolution of humanity, which is, the pilot points out, is entirely false. And the false facade civilization infrastructure is manifested in the form of many, many, many different versions of pyramid civilizations, which exist all over the entire planet. In Egypt and China and Mesoamerica, South America, every continent of the world, Europe, there are pyramids everywhere, all around the world, and many of which have only recently been discovered. They're still discovering pyramids. They're flying airplanes over the Amazon jungle with ground-penetrating radar, and are discovering hundreds and hundreds of pyramids that have never been excavated, beneath the canopy of the jungle, and so on and so forth.
Oh, Lawrence, we can get into the pyramid thing after, but I think I described to you a little bit about what I felt about that, but I won't interrupt you about that right now.
Okay.
Well, that's the perfect time. I'm sorry, Lawrence, but we're going to take just 5 minutes so everybody can get something to drink and take a little bathroom break or whatever needs to happen. And then when we jump back in, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about when you talk about these pyramid civilizations, I think it's a prime example of exactly the structures that we're living. But I also think that when you're talking about what it brings up for me is, again, the pyramids themselves, like what you're talking about, again, these structures that are set all over the world, right? What that really means and how that is in so much of opposite of what I myself and probably a lot of other people have believed to be true. So again, That's where we'll jump back in when we come back.
That's
and we're just
great. That's a great point to start the next segment with. Yeah.
Yay! I'm so Lawrence, thank you so much for coming on. This is so exciting. So, okay, Martin, are you ready for some tunes?
Did he fall asleep? He might have fallen asleep.
I'm ready.
Okay, good. All right, everybody. So I hope everybody got refreshed and is ready for our next hour of this amazing interview. I'm so happy again that Lawrence, you're with us. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Oh, good. And Rhonda, are you there?
I'm back. Yes, I'm here.
Oh, good. Okay, so before we left for the break, what was brought up are these the Stonehenge, certain areas that have been known as either, let's say, holy or maybe even metaphysical or somehow valued on different levels. And that was discussed in these interviews. And then also, I believe, from what you mentioned, maybe that in the nurses' notes and things like that. So can you go into that?
Yeah. So returning to the pilot's description to the nurse during the course of the interview about what the domain discovered about the planet Earth is that the planet Earth has been being used as a prison planet for a long time. The way the prison system operates is kind of I'll just give you an overview from my understanding of it and having studied it now and talked to a lot of people about it for the last 7 years. The way it works essentially is you get a whole bunch of people brought to this planet as disembodied spiritual entities to be put here and kept here permanently in prison. So one of the first actions of imprisonment is to erase the memory of the being, because each being, according to the pilot and the opinion of the pilot, is an immortal spiritual being. And every being has existed in a state of perpetual decision to be for all of eternity, since before the beginning of eternity, and will always continue to be so, because that's just the nature of who we are and who spiritual beings are, regardless of the kind of body they inhabit or where they live and what universe or under whatever guise, in whatever time frame. If you're a sentient and a sentient being, then you're really an immortal spiritual being. So that applies to all of the various life forms on this planet and anywhere else that life may exist that could be considered to be sentient. So on this planet in particular, being set up to be used as a prison, the way the prison was set up is the beings are brought to this planet. They have their memory erased through the use of very, very forceful use of electricity and electronics to just literally physically erase your memory with electricity, just like similar to, if you stick your finger in the light socket and get a really huge electric shock, you won't remember anything for a while. In the case of the prison, it's set up in such a way that the idea is to erase the memory of the being, which the pilot refers to as, uses the abbreviation ISBE, IS-BE, for short for immortal spiritual being. The memory of the ISBE is erased, so they don't know where they came from, who they are. They have no memory. They don't know who brought them here, how they got here. So the being, after they're inhabiting a biological body on Earth, they assume that, this must be who I am and where I'm from. See, I have this body, so this must be who I really am, because I don't have any memory of having been anyone else, or I don't have any memory of even being a spiritual being. As far as I know, I'm just a body, and I breathe and I eat and I poop and I have sex and I have screaming babies, and I just go on and on and on until I die, and that's it. That's the end of it. Well, that's a very convincing story, and all of the physical evidence would indicate that that's actually the only reality that exists after you've had your immortal memory erased and your ability as an immortal being erased. So to reinforce this illusion of a prison system, the old empire operatives who set up this planet as a prison very carefully went around the entire planet, and they built these monuments of stone, these gigantic, huge, megalithic stone monuments all over the world. And if you study these monuments, you discover that they're all built out of the same kind of rock, very heavy, dense, crystalline forms of rock, and they're placed strategically all around the world. And they're, the pyramids of Egypt and Mesoamerica and South America and China, and there's Stonehenge, and there's all of these various megalithic monuments on the Easter Island and so on, and they go all around the world. They're all indecipherable. Nobody knows how they were built, where they came from, who built them. They're a total mystery. Nobody's ever been able to figure it out in spite of, tremendous amount of research, especially in recent years, and investigation. There are no clues to their origins or the technology used to build them. Well, some researchers recently have discovered, in fact, I think this was even on the History Channel on television in the United States, that all of these megalithic stone monument structures around the Earth, when you draw lines between them, it turns out that they all form this grid, and they're all interconnected with each other in exact, precise geometric connection. And they form a geodetic grid. In other words, the lines connect with each other precisely all around the planet. And collectively, all of this stone emits an electronic frequency, a wave frequency, which as a whole, surrounding the entire planet, acts as a kind of low frequency force screen. So, which is kind of an interesting phenomenon all by itself, to say the least. Because
it was on Ancient Aliens. Actually, they talked about
Ancient Aliens. Okay, good. Yeah, Ancient Aliens. So there's this grid that all of these stone structures form all around the world. Well, that obviously is not an accident. Not only is the building of the various pyramid structures not an accident and require technology that's beyond our comprehension and ability to duplicate, well, not only was it done in isolated places around the world, it was done around the entire planet as a collective and obviously very intricately planned construction project many thousands of years ago, before prehistory. All of the civilizations that existed in these various places were completely disconnected, apparently. They couldn't possibly have communicated with each other, spoken the same language, had technology to transport the stones or do the carving, the architecture, the placement, on and on and on and on. Virtually, what you're talking about is an indecipherable, inexplicable, technologically impossible feat that was done by somebody all this time ago around the planet. Well, the pilot says in the interviews that her civilization discovered that this prison system was being operated by the old empire in this exact fashion, and that the pyramid structures built around the world were done in such a way as to be mysterious. They're intentionally mysterious. They're intentionally designed and put together in this grid of electronic force for two purposes. One is the purpose is to make it appear to the prisoners on Earth that the civilizations of Earth have evolved gradually over a long, many thousands of years, and it's all very mysterious. And our ancestors had technology that we don't have anymore, and our ancestors were lost in some cataclysm, 10, 12, 15,000 years ago, whatever, global floods, volcanoes, blah, 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 whatever, any number of natural disasters that occur on this planet on a regular basis, part of which is the reason why this planet was chosen apparently as a prison, is because nobody else would want to live on this planet. Because the whole thing gets destroyed periodically by collisions of continents grinding each other, which causes volcanoes and earthquakes and tsunamis, and the planet shifts on its poles periodically and causes an ice age or causes a magnetic shift in the and everything, and the planet is virtually destroyed from time to time. So who in the hell would want to live here to begin with? So it makes a perfect situation for somebody who needs a handy dandy prison to get rid of all their unwanted criminals and sexual perverts and undesirable personnel, for whatever they define that as being. So the prison system is constructed of several parts. One is this false facade. It's apparent ancient civilization that existed all over the world that built all these old monuments that nobody can figure out where they came from or what they were for or what they did. And there's innumerable theories about these things, and fills thousands of books and TV shows and so forth as to who did it, why, when, so on and so forth. Well, the pilot says that there's no rhyme or reason to it, and as long as you investigate it, nobody will ever figure it out, because the simple truth is it's intended to be a false facade. It's intended to be an illusion. It's intended to be a mystery, which serves the purpose of reinforcing the amnesia that the prisoners have been given. It reinforces the illusion that planet Earth is your home and you evolved here and this is where you're from, and you're just a biological body, and that your ancestors came out of some primordial ooze billions of years ago on this planet, and the planet's only 4.5 billion years old, and blah 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 blah, all this mythology, which is incorporated into the prison planet machinery, which includes not only amnesia, it includes the use of hypnosis and implanting of false information, false ideas, false memories, all designed to keep the prisoners of Earth from remembering who they are, where they came from, and who brought them here, how they got here. So you would have to admit that that's a pretty good prison system. That's really, really clever. I've come to really admire how clever the prison system is, and how intricately and technically it's been built and maintained. And apparently the whole thing is done automatically. The machinery is in place to keep it going on in perpetuity, forever and ever. When you die, you leave your body. At the end of the lifetime, you go out of your body. You encounter the force screen. The force screens capture you electronically. They put you back through the amnesia process. They give you a whole bunch of mind control suggestions and purposes of why you need to go back to Earth and have another lifetime. And you need to go back to Earth, and because you have a very important purpose, you need to go save somebody. You need to live a better life and improve your karma and raise your consciousness up, and become a better person than who you've been in the past, and blah 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 blah. All this nonsense that really is designed to just keep you in this squirrel cage, running on this treadmill of reincarnation, life after life after life on this planet, never having the thought that you might want to leave this planet and go back to where you came from, or remember who you are or how you got here or who brought you here. And God forbid that you should go back and destroy the people who put you on this prison planet to begin with. I mean, that's the last thing. The government who brought you here wants you
they don't want that.
No, they want you to stay in prison forever and ever and ever, and they don't want you to be aware that you're in prison. So it's all very cleverly designed to make it appear that Earth is it. This is your home. This is where you came from. You evolved here. Of course, this is like your natural environment. So what that electricity didn't exist here 150 years ago, and before that, there was no technology of any kind with which to detect the presence of the prison system. Well, the pilot gets into describing in the course of the interviews in very, very great detail exactly how it was that they discovered the existence of the prison planet, and the fact that these 3,000 members of their own invasion force were captured and put into this prison on Earth, and that they've been here ever since, and they've been conducting missions to try to locate and identify and rescue their own personnel who have been on this planet now as, part of the prison system now for about 10,000 years. So the domain forces have two principal interests in Earth. One is as part of their property, part of the conquest of the physical universe, which they now own and control. And secondarily, because they have some of their own personnel here that they would very much like to recover. But they're not able to, because they're not able to figure out how to extract somebody as a spiritual being from this prison system, which is very, very, very thoroughly and cleverly built and maintained, and is apparently nobody's, at least no one in the domain, according to what the pilot says, has been able to figure out how to rescue anybody from Earth. Once you're here forever, and that's it. And they don't have, as the domain, don't have the resources to send or invest in, successfully pulling off this rescue operation at this time. I'm sure that another concern that they have is that, how do you emancipate or free all of the prisoners from prison when the prison population includes psychopathic mass murderers, perverts, addicts of every kind, pathological, political madmen, every form of the most hideous, undesirable being you could ever conceive is imprisoned on this planet, together with a huge population of just normal folks. And lots of artists, and lots of brilliant engineers and inventors, and all kinds of other people that are not needed in an ancient civilization that's already invented everything there is to be invented. They don't need a better mousetrap. They need a tax-paying, obedient citizen. Right. So if you're on this planet, you're probably, according to the pilot, you're here because you don't fit into the category of what the old empire government considered to be an acceptable citizen. So meanwhile, here we are, stuck on this planet, unable to escape or even detect the fact that we're in prison. And so here we are. So essentially, in a thumbnail overview, this is what the pilot tells the nurse. And at that time, 1947, the nurse is a 23-year-old woman who was a devout Catholic, and to her, she was like, wow, flabbergasted. Can't even believe it. Well, I mean, who can believe it? I mean, it's just the more you study the details of the information imparted by the pilot in the transcripts, the crazier and more wild it seems on the surface. But the thing that I've experienced personally, and lots of other people who have communicated with me about this information over the years, is that the more you study it and the more you investigate to find out whether or not the information given by the pilot is actual or factual, the more you discover that it really is factual, and that what the pilot says is going on here really is going on here on Earth. As unbelievable and overwhelming and incredible as that seems, that's apparently what the real situation is, the actual reality of our situation. All false facades and superstition, brainwashing, mind control, amnesia to the contrary. Apparently what the pilot says is what's actually happening. However, every single individual needs to determine that for themselves, because it is an entirely subjective experience. It has to be perceived by each individual. There is, as far as I can see, I'm just saying my opinion. My opinion is that each individual has to investigate and study, if they're interested or not, for themselves, and make their own investigation and their own decision, because it's not one of those things that somebody could stand up on a pulpit and preach to you and say, you need to believe this or die, or you're going to go to hell. Well, you're already in hell, so what do you got to lose? I mean, if you're going out, the pilot says, I think kind of facetiously, says, if we send out a mission around the universe looking for hell and we found Earth, we would say, okay, we found it. This is it.
Great.
So, if you're already in hell, what do you have to lose by investigating, the situation that you find yourself in to see if there might not be some other possible explanation for what we call reality on this planet?
I love to hear you say that, because that's been kind of a basis of this show, is that if something doesn't make sense, or if something isn't working, I should say more like, is if we look at our systems and the things that we've believed, and then we take a look around, that's probably not the way that we would intend it. And so I think we do have to take into perspective things exactly like what you're talking about. And I really appreciate, first of all, your opinion on the transcripts. And I feel like, even though I know that you have said that it's not any different than anyone else's, or that it is different, but that everyone has one, and I agree with that. I also think that you've been talking about this, you've been connected to it, you've been learning and understanding it more. And the reason that I again say that is, the more I listen to it and the more I read the material, the more understanding I have. And maybe even somebody in the chat said that, the original language. And I think as you tap into these transcripts and as you tap into this information, your own perspective does come in if you allow it. I mean, do you think that that's true?
Well, certainly, yeah. I mean, what I've been telling you about the transcripts, I'm trying to just tell you as factually as I can what the pilot said in the transcripts, parenthetically, kind of trying to summarize some of the core concepts. The details of the pilot's description and the nurse's opinion and comments about the description are, of course, included in the book. The footnotes that I included in the book expand on that. The details of names, date, places, so forth, expand on it quite a bit. So the book itself contains lots and lots of information, but it's like anything else. When you begin to study something or investigate it, you start to be able to connect the dots or not. So as you begin to study the material in greater detail and then learn more to amplify your knowledge of all of the parenthetical information associated with the information given by the pilot and the nurse and the information in the footnotes and so forth of the book, you begin to see a much, much, much bigger picture, a much more complete picture, and a much more detailed picture of all of this information and how it all connects, how the dots connect. Just like these guys revealed on the Ancient Alien shows. When they start studying all of these megalithic structures all around the world as a collective whole, instead of just each one individually, they discover, oh my God, the whole thing forms this very, very intricate grid that creates a force field around the entire planet because of the stone that it's made out of, and because of the configuration of where the stones are placed on the planet. Well, that's quite a different picture of planet Earth than just looking at a photograph of the pyramids at Giza and going, oh, gee, isn't that interesting? It must be all from Atlantis or something. It's when you start drilling down to the details, you discover, wow, there's a hell of a lot more going on here than anybody ever wanted us to believe. Which is exactly the point. If planet Earth truly is a prison and is being operated and maintained as a prison, the very, very last thing that the prison operators would want you to understand or discover is that, first of all, that you're in prison, and second of all, that you might be able to get out.
Well, and so they would create all kinds of different, because people, like what you were saying, would make sense if you have all of these different beings coming from all different areas, all different types of levels of intelligence, all different levels of, evil or whatever you want to call it. It would make sense that you would have all of these different levels of manipulation, right? Like,
Yeah, exactly. Well, the pilot describes in some detail the nature of the mechanical or electronic nature of the prison system, which is very, very highly electronic. I mean, it's there are apparently pieces of machinery located at various places underneath the surface of the planet. She names 3 specific locations. One is near the Rwenzori Mountains in Africa, which is near Lake Victoria. One is under the Pyrenees Mountains, which borders between France and Spain. And the other is in the steppes of Mongolia, which covers a vast area of eastern China, or north of eastern of China. So that there are electronic mechanisms of entrapment and being able to detect and capture a disembodied spirit and put them through the recycling machinery again, so to speak. And apparently there are other similar kinds of electronic detection devices and parts of the amnesia machinery and the machinery that operates mind control and false memory and all of that sort of thing are also located at various other places throughout the solar system and in the galaxy, perhaps on other planets like Mars or Saturn. Astrology is a very, very interesting study I've discovered because it reveals that you can actually detect apparently influences of mind control or behavior control phenomena in the lives of people over a long, long period of time. And it's a very, very highly precise and mathematical science. It's not just, some witch doctor or some fortune teller,
right.
Sitting behind a crystal ball. Apparently, the study of astrology, for example, has existed for some thousands of years, and nobody really knows where it came from, or who developed it, or how it was developed, or how it even works necessarily. But it does seem to detect that there is a very definite influence of mind control or behavior control among the population of Earth, depending upon where your particular biological body was born at what moment and at what geographical location. Your particular biological body was born in this lifetime determines a whole pattern of predetermined influences over your thinking and behavior and so on and so forth. Just as an example, this is I've discovered from other people who have been researching that this might be one way of detecting this phenomena that the pilot is describing in these interviews. This amnesia, mind control, hypnosis, prison system kind of environment that we find ourselves in on planet Earth. Not the least of which is biological bodies themselves. Biological bodies are part of the prison system.
Right.
They're biologically engineered on purpose over a long, long period of time in biological engineering laboratories long, long ago, designed specifically for the gravitational and chemical construct of this type of planet. And it's very, very suitable to a prison planet kind of environment because the bodies are extremely fragile. They're, you can't live for more than 4 or 5 minutes without breathing air. You can't submerge yourself underwater for 4 or 5 minutes without dying. You can't raise the temperature more than 10 degrees without dying, so on and so forth. So it makes a really, really good prison, just the biological body itself. Plus, it's very susceptible to hypnotic influences and chemical influences and so on and so forth. So together with the planet as a prison mechanism and the biological body of each individual, which isolates us from each other, the languages we speak isolate us from each other, sexuality isolates us from each other. All of these things that a prison system would find very desirable are really embodied wonderfully well on planet Earth. It all works very, very well as a prison system. If you look at it from that point of view, or if you look for clues to given by the pilot in the interview transcripts, you can see it in front of your eyes everywhere you go, every day, all the time. But it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing to look at. I find it personally very, very depressing and overwhelming, and it's not happy news, to have these realizations or become aware of this phenomena. But on the other hand, if you don't know, how can you figure out how to escape if you don't know that you're in prison to begin?
Now, here's the other thing that I think that I want you to mention is because when you said just modified and all of these different things, one of the things that the interview mentions, which I just found so, like, it almost dropped me to my knees, I guess, in a way, or the thought of it regardless, is that the reproduction, right? I mean, not only is the prison planet, like you're saying, set up perfectly, but then we bring them back. Like, we are set up to reproduce the human form that keeps the prisoners on the planet. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's like it really is.
Yeah, it's a self-regenerating. The prison is self-regenerating. Because to the degree that a biological body on this planet has the ability to reproduce itself, the prison then becomes, to that degree, self-replicating and perpetual, which is very clever. I mean, it's the part of the reason, part of what keeps that system in force is the superstition that everything on this, all the life forms on this planet, including our own bodies, evolved here. This is just a natural ascension from simpler life forms or simpler cellular organisms into more and more complex organisms, and which developed over billions of years to become what we consider ourselves to be, which is the highest form of evolution and intelligence on the planet. And because we have human biological bodies and our brains are bigger in proportion to our bodies than any other life form, that entitles us to rule the earth and destroy it and kill each other and do whatever the hell we want to do, because we're the biggest and the best in our own opinion. Well, essentially what the pilot is saying is that all of that is a lie, and it's all part of the prison machinery. It's designed that way in purpose, and the whole subject of evolution is a fabricated lie designed as part of the prison system. But from the point of view of galactic civilization that she's from, that looking at Earth and the rest of this universe from the outside in, she's telling the nurse in these interviews that this is all a lie. The type of biological body that you inhabit and all the other life forms that are inhabited and animated by spiritual beings on this planet were manufactured in biological laboratories over a period of billions or trillions of years long ago in other places. And all of those life forms were brought to this planet and planted here a long time ago. And the life forms are replenished and replaced at various times according to whatever they decide to do.
Bugs and blossoms, right?
Yeah, the biological engineering technology that we see being used now on this planet since the advent of electricity. We see biological engineering resurrecting itself as a technology. It's being remembered by certain people. But according to the pilot, this technology has existed in an extremely highly developed state for trillions of years. And it's been used as part of the prison machinery on this planet, very specifically as part of this prison machinery, which includes not only human beings, but all of the other sentient beings that inhabit life forms on this planet too, which would include whales and dolphins and porpoises and chimpanzees and parrots and crows and earthworms and anything else that you could consider to be a sentient being is also imprisoned here, because they're all spiritual beings. And just because we as human beings, consider ourselves to be the biggest and the greatest and the most wonderful in our own opinion, doesn't make it so. And from the point of view of the intergalactic civilization, human beings in biological bodies, as seen on this planet, are indeed the lowest form of life in the hierarchy of the intergalactic civilization from which she's from. She says the beings from her civilization will not inhabit biological bodies under any circumstances. That's forbidden and avoided. They don't use biological bodies. If they don't use bodies at all, unless they're performing a particular function or task in the physical universe, like piloting a spacecraft or what have you. They use various types of artificially created bodies that are non-biological to perform various functions, like a tool. You have a body that you use like a hammer or a screwdriver, and when you're done with it, you lay it aside and go on about your business as a spiritual being. You don't need a body. Body is a liability to you. But most especially a biological body, which is so fragile you can't even stop breathing for 4 minutes. I mean, of what possible use could a biological body be to somebody that's traveling trillions of light years across space? I mean, obviously, it's absurd. The notion of it is, which is why biological bodies are on the bottom of the totem pole as far from the point of view of the intergalactic space traveling civilization.
Which would make sense too, is that that's exactly where you would put, or how you would, if you were going to imprison or, teach a lesson or whatever, all these different terms that people use, this would be the perfect place, right? I mean, the body, for example.
Yeah, I mean, what could be better for a prison? I mean, you put somebody in a prison, they can't possibly escape. I mean, that's the ideal situation for a prison system. They put you in prison and it's not possible for you to escape. Well, that describes Earth perfectly. Because if you're here and you're inhabiting a biological body on this planet, it's not possible for you to escape, even if you knew you were in prison.
That's the whole thing. And because of the grids and all of these different things that actually entrap, I mean, this is what this alien was saying, is that basically, if I'm reading it right, is that basically it even the reason that they don't come here is because of the traps. Even like, for example, the 3,000 that came here of a higher, they still became entrapped. And that
the only reason they were here because they weren't aware at that time that it was a prison. They weren't aware of it.
Right, which makes
10,000 years ago, they weren't. They only discovered it after their installation was attacked, and they were captured and imprisoned. And then subsequently, other members of the domain came to look for them to find out what happened to them, and then they discovered sometime later this whole phenomena of the entrapment and so forth.
Which again, it makes sense to in so many ways. It ties into, even, I guess, as I was reading the transcripts, it's like what you were saying, as you start to look, as you start to just pay attention. It's not even, it's like, for the audience or people that are listening, I mean, it's like, yes, you take in the information, but then you just watch, like what you're saying, and all of a sudden, you start to see things for, I want to say, for what they really are, but it's more like the illusion seems to be dropping in a different way, and not like a veil or like some great awakening, more just like it's been there the whole time. But and I mention this on every show, it's the ships sitting, when the Indians couldn't see the ships of the New World, right? Because they didn't have them in their consciousness. Well, that's exactly what this whole concept is. It's like, it seems so far-fetched to everybody, but if you start breaking things down that we have believed and seen, and then you take a look around at the planet, like people are saying, oh, well, we have evolved and the mind is doing this and all these different things. Well, that may be true in some cases, but I'm going to see that, or I'm going to say that when you look around the planet, a majority is still in the lowest vibration possible of survival. So it's hard to believe that all of the things that we have been taught are true. They just don't make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. I have one other thought when you mentioned that is another thing that the pilot says, which I think is kind of maybe the most important part of the information that she described to the nurse in these transcripts is the realization that the domain, because they have members of their own force here on Earth that have been put through the same amnesia process and put into biological bodies and so forth as everybody else inside the prison. They've invested a lot of time and resources over the past 8,000 years or so trying to figure out how to free or emancipate their own captured members of their own military force, and have not been able to do so successfully. And the pilot says that part of the principal reason for their inability to do that is because Earth doesn't have enough technology available on it at this time to enable them to do what they would need to do to disable the electronic machinery and mechanisms that exist around the planet and in this part of the solar system or galaxy that keep the prison planet in place electronically. That would include, I think, the amnesia, mind control, hypnosis, false memory, all of those parts of that machinery that are electronically used electronically to keep the spiritual beings in the squirrel cage and keep running on the treadmill of the prison planet and remaining unaware of themselves as an immortal being and remaining unaware of each other and of anything beyond this planet or any lifetime or any existence prior to arriving in the prison system on Earth, which goes back, for unlimited trillions and trillions of years back to the very beginnings of any universe. I mean, history has been literally erased on this planet for each individual spiritual being. But the pilot does say that as part of their attempted rescue mission of their own personnel, they have implanted some technology on Earth recently in an attempt to increase the level of technology on Earth in a long-term effort to rescue their own personnel. She said it might be 5,000 years before they're able to bring enough resources to bear to do this rescue, because right now it's not their priority. I mean, they have other things to do, like invading the rest of the universe. But there are two things that have occurred fairly recently that she says have influenced our ability to possibly help rescue ourselves. One is that around 1250 AD, the space battle that was being fought between the remnants of the old Empire space fleet that were in this area and the Domain space fleet in this area, that battle was finally concluded, and the Domain succeeded in wiping out the old Empire space fleet that remained in this part of the galaxy. At which time, some of the machinery, the prison planet machinery, was destroyed as part of that warfare. And coincidentally, that helped to release some of the influences of mind control and amnesia from the population of Earth as a whole. And that was coincident with the beginning of what we call the Western Renaissance, and the reinvention of modern sciences and mathematics and so forth was coincident with the end of that war, which if you study reports of space battles apparently happening around the world that goes back in prehistory, and the Vimanas and the Vedic hymns, and a lot of mythology from around the world describes wars being fought in the air, and there's a lot of evidence that nuclear warfare has occurred on this planet in the distant past, and so on and so forth. But apparently this warfare helped destroy a little bit of the machinery of the prison planet system, so that we're beginning to remember more and more gradually of who we are and where we came from, and the technology that we already knew, as beings before we were ever brought to Earth and before our memories were erased. Secondarily, the domain is implanting technology on the Earth as a part of trying to speed up the process of regaining sufficient amount of technology on Earth so that they can do their own rescue mission, so to speak. And a number of those technologies are incremental to what we call modern civilization. The most conspicuous of those inventions is electricity and electronics, brought to Earth by Nikola Tesla. And as incredible as it sounds, the pilot says that Nikola Tesla is one of the officers from the domain force that's stationed in this area that came here voluntarily to help install some of this technology in Western civilization. If you've studied anything about Nikola Tesla, you know that this man single-handedly pretty much changed planet Earth from the Dark Ages into an electronic civilization by himself. It's mind-boggling, the number of inventions and the magnitude of the inventions that he created that absolutely we wouldn't have electricity if it weren't for this guy, among many, many other things. Secondarily, the spacecraft that crashed in Roswell in 1947, the pilot describes to the military in the transcript, she says, there are certain parts of my spacecraft that if you take to your laboratories and study, you'll be able to develop certain kinds of technology that will help you. And she names off 5 or 6 or 7 different things that they should look for. And years later, there was a really great book written by an Army officer, Lieutenant Philip Corso, describing the fact that he, as an Army officer, received some parts of that spacecraft, and part of his job was to give those artifacts to various American corporations to see if they could reverse engineer technology from the pieces of the spacecraft from the Roswell crash. And that book was called The Day After Roswell, written by Philip Corso. Anyway, that's a really, really interesting book because he details a number of different technologies that have been developed from the remnants of that crash. So even though the government denies the whole thing and covers it up and says that it was just a weather balloon, lots and lots of other people have come forward over the years and revealed various pieces of information that point to the reality that these things actually did happen. And there's a growing body of evidence that the Roswell crash did actually happen, and the events described by the nurse and the pilot in the interviews are factual. So if you make that assumption as a basis for investigation and understanding and begin to explore the details of what the pilot says in the interviews and expand on it, it takes you in some really, really pretty amazing and enlightening places. A lot of people tell me that, reading the book has completely changed their lives, which I can full well understand, because it's quite, the information revealed in the interviews is pretty much 100% opposite of everything you've ever learned on this planet or been told to believe or thought, is almost totally the opposite. of what the pilot says is going on this planet, which is kind of an interesting premise or a basis of departure for investigation.
Which is, I think, one of the reasons that it was so important for us to have you on this show. When Rhonda and I read your book, it was just phenomenally changing, I guess. And it's more than just reading a transcript and becoming some kind of follower of another, what do you call it, like a new age trend and all this other stuff. It's more than that. It's, it's like you're saying, when you start researching it and you start reading about it and you start putting things together, even with the Bible, every religion, it's like all of a sudden you start going, it starts clicking and you start seeing the truth. It's phenomenal. I really appreciate you having the courage to bring this out.
Well, I don't know if it requires any courage or not. It's just, the nurse asked me to publish the material. At first, I thought the whole thing was just, a hoax and crazy, and didn't take it very seriously until I just decided I would give it a thorough read and investigation. And the more I studied it, the more I realized that it's, at least in my opinion, is factual. But whether or not the information is true is kind of beside the point. To me, the point is that if you study the material and really digest it and research it and look into it in greater detail and start thinking with it, it takes you in places and points of view and understanding you've never been before, that no one else has ever been, as far as I know. I mean, I'm not particularly highly educated about esoteric things, but it really does open some doors to understanding that, as far as I know, didn't exist before. So to me, personally, the value of the material is that it may give you people who read it a different point of view or a different perspective on themselves and our existence and reality as we conceive it to be, and maybe help you to think better or
different anyway, right? It's
think differently anyway. Yeah. But the last thing we need is another cult or another religion.
Exactly right. That's where I was just getting ready to go. So I'm sorry, it looks like we have about 2 minutes left. And so this show went by so fast. I'm just so surprised. And again, I want to thank you, Lawrence. But could you also give people your website and how they can contact you and get more information and that type of thing before we have to say goodbye?
Yeah, the website is alieninterview.org, alieninterview.org. And there's lots and lots of information on the website that's not in the book, and all kinds of videos and things that people have sent to me over the years that I've added to it. And there's a YouTube channel related to the book, and 10 different translations of the book and audiobooks and all kinds of versions of the book that are all you can link, that are all linked to on the website. So if you go to alieninterview.org, you can find out all kinds of other information related to it and carry on with your own research.
Yes, and that is so great. And thank you again, like I said, for bringing this to the table. Rhonda, thank you for getting in touch with Lawrence. As usual, you are like the people finder of the best ever, and I just love you. Thank you. And good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you.